Now that we've agreed on the use cases, let's think about the problem's constraints, or let's do some math. With any system, at a bare minimum, there are two typical things to think about. The one is the amount of traffic the system should handle, and the other is the amount of data the system should work with. So in the context of the URL shortener problem, you should ask how many requests per month should the site handle, and how many new URLs per month should the site handle. And ultimately, we'll want to scale these down to per second as opposed to per month. So you may even ask your interviewer directly for the per second values. It's just sometimes simpler to think about these in terms of per month requests or URLs. And your interviewer may tell you these numbers directly, or they may test you further by saying, well, assume it's not going to be in the top 3 most popular URL shortening services on the web, but it's going to be in the top 10. So at this point, you'll need to do some math yourself to figure these things out. So let's assume the interviewer wants us to do this. So how do we do it? Well, most people are aware of the web's hottest big data statistics. How many active users Facebook has, like 1.3 billion. How many active users Twitter has, roughly 650 million. And how many new tweets are made per day, roughly 500 million, and so on. And these numbers may have changed by the time you're watching this, but the point is we can use these as an approximation for the metrics that matter to us. And as you can see, they're all roughly, at least at this point, in the $500 million to $1.5 billion kind of range. So for example, you've probably read that Twitter users generate roughly 500 million new tweets per day. So over an entire month, this makes 15 billion, so 15 billion new tweets, right? Now, not every tweet will have a shortened URL, and Twitter is not the only service that has the need for URL shortening. However, it certainly was a huge driver for URL shortening, and we can probably assume that a very large percentage of URL shortening on the web is driven by Twitter usage. So let's say that between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 tweets contains a shortened URL. That makes between 750 million and 1.5 billion new URLs per month. And we'll assume that the order of magnitude of all shortened URLs is going to be roughly 1.5 billion new URLs each month, growing over time. So, all shortened URLs per month, like 1.5 billion. Now, of these, the top 3 sites on the web probably shorten 80%, leaving the other 20% or 300 million per month to the rest. So 80% go to the top 3, 20% go to everything else. So going below the top 3 sites, the traffic curve is most likely going to be a lot more flat. So assuming we're one of the large players shortening these 300 million, we'll probably, and actually let's write that down. So sites below the top 3 shorten 300 million per month. So assuming we're one of the large players, we'll probably be getting between 10% to a third of that. And so let's be conservative and let's factor growth in. And so we can say that we'll be handling a third. So we'll be shortening, will be shortening roughly 100 million URLs each month. And this is a very important number. So let's write it down and I'll wipe everything else. I'll say, math. 1 new URLs per month, 100 million. Next, we need to worry about how many requests our service will need to handle. We know that at least 100 million requests will come in, driven by the shortening use case, right? With all these new URLs per month. But how many requests total? Well, without going into too much detail, but if we assumed that URLs are kind of like news and their average lifetime is, let's say, 1 to 2 weeks, let's say 2 weeks, and then people stop clicking on them. And that's the average case, right? Some URLs are going to last longer, some are going to only last, a few minutes until the next tweet arrives. And then if we again assume an 80-20 distribution of traffic from these URLs, so 20% of all URLs generate 80% of the traffic, after some quick math, we get to roughly 1 billion requests per month. So that's another important number to write down. So 1 billion requests per month. And we should note that 10% come from shortening and 90% come from redirection. So 10% from shortening, those are our 100 million, and 90% from redirection. And this will become relevant in the future. Now, an important point. Don't worry about these being 100% correct. In fact, I'm sure they aren't. The point is, don't give up just because you don't know the numbers. Try to get them in the right ballpark. Your interviewer is going to help you if you're way off, but it's important to demonstrate that you're not intimidated by those questions and that you can demonstrate the right thought process. Alright, so we have 100 million new users, new URLs per month and 1 billion requests per month. We're not done with the math yet. Next, let's look at what this means for our site in terms of requests per second and in terms of total data stored. Well, the requests per second are pretty easy, so we can say something like requests per second, and that's just 1 billion, that number, divided by 30 days, divided by 24 hours, and then by 3600 seconds. And if you just did that math very quickly, you'll see that that's around 400 requests per second. Actually, I'll just write this, 400 plus. And again, we know that 40, due to this, we know that 40 are going to be shortens and 360 are going to be redirects, roughly, because we think that that's what our traffic looks like. Great. Now, finally, how much data will our system need to handle? Well, to answer this, we need to think about what data we'll need to store. And it really is relatively simple. For each URL, we need to store the URL itself so that we can retrieve it, along with the shortened hash. The total number of URLs will accumulate over time is going to be, well, let's see how many. So total URLs is going to be, let's say that we'll look 5 years ahead. So 5 years times 12 months times 100 million per month. So that's about 6 billion URLs. So we can say 6 billion URLs in 5 years, right? And the average length of our URL is probably going to be somewhere between 100 and 1,000 characters. Sometimes you might see 2,000 characters. URLs longer than that break some of even the most modern browsers. But typically, I'd probably pick 500 for the typical URL, just to be safe. So we can say, 500 bytes per URL. And for the hashes, let's assume for a second that we don't allow custom URLs, because chances are custom URLs aren't going to have that big of an impact. They're not going to be a huge percentage of the URLs. So how big of a hash will we need so that we can handle 6 billion URLs? Well, to make everything as short as possible, if we used an alphabet containing numbers and upper and lower case letters, the answer is going to be the the base 62 logarithm of, let's say, 6 billion, so that we have, you know, some breathing room above the 6 billion. Why the base 62 logarithm? Well, that's just the power to which we need to raise number 62 to get to 10 billion. And this is somewhere, it's less than 10 characters, probably somewhere around 6 or 7. If you do some quick math, you'll see that 6 characters is probably sufficient. So we can say 6 bytes per hash, something like that, right? So we said that custom URLs should hopefully not change the data very much, mostly because people aren't likely to want to ping long URLs anyway, so we can limit custom URLs to something like 8 or 16 characters, but they're not going to be very frequent, at least that's my assumption. So we have 6 billion times 500 bytes for the total storage of URLs over 5 years, and 6 billion times 6 bytes for the hashes. So that's a nice amount of data. Let's write those down. So number 8 is going to be 3 terabytes for all URLs and 36 gigabytes for all hashes, again over 5 years, right? We're looking ahead, not 10 years, not 20, but still, you know, 5 years is plenty. And finally, let's compute how much data we'll need to go through our system each second, just to make sure that's not some huge number. We have, let's say, new data written per second. Well, we know that we have 40 shortens, and this is the only time we actually write something new, whenever we shorten something. So 40 times roughly 500 plus 6 bytes, even though there definitely is going to be some overhead, but we're trying to again look at the ballpark here. So that's roughly 20K. And then data read per second, this time it's the 360 redirects, they read data, times, again, you know, 506 bytes, and that's about 180K. Perfect. Now let's review these constraints. We now have scoped our problem beautifully. We know how many new URLs per month, the total number of requests. We know a little bit about the requests themselves, how much data per second, all that stuff. And this is an excellent place to start. This took a while, but we now understand the problem a lot better. And keep in mind that in an actual interview, this whole thing should happen in a matter of a few minutes. Here it took us about 15 minutes because I'm going through everything as I think about it and all that. But in the interview, you'll be able to do a lot of that math a lot more quickly in your brain, and especially with a bunch of practice. So it should take you, you know, a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes to clear everything. And then you'll be ready. And so at this point, we can move into creating the actual design for our system. Let's go.